Welcome to the McFeely Mess Podcast at Inforum.com. In-depth conversations and opinion covering a variety of topics from the world of news, sports, and more. Here's Mike McFeely.
Welcome to another episode of the McFeely Mess Podcast at Inforum.com. And we are heading west, young men, today to talk with Alex Taylor of Wyosports.com. It's the newspaper website based in Laramie and Boomerang, Wyoming, which of course is where the University of Wyoming is located, which of course is a member of North Dakota State football's new conference, which of course means they'll play in football, which of course means that we need to talk to Alex about a column that he wrote recently with the headline, "Will Wyoming and North Dakota State be Mountain West rivals?" I personally think it's the easiest question to answer ever in the history of sports, but we'll get Alex's thoughts on it. Hello, sir. How are you? Welcome to the pod.
I appreciate you having me on. Good to talk some ball here, pass some time in June.
Yeah. Well, it's like we were just talking off the air, though, and for Wyoming and the other Mountain West members, this is no big deal because it's just another June. But for North Dakota State and their newness to the Mountain West and their newness to FBS, it's something happening every day, man. I mean, there's something to talk about. There's something to write about, which I just wrote a column about before I called you up. It's just something happening every week when it comes to this FBS stuff. So that's good for content, and it's good for interest for us in Fargo.
Yeah, for sure. And just as a college football fan, I think the most exciting thing for me is just to see just the transformation of, and it's conference realignment isn't always the greatest deal, obviously, when you look at the national scale of college football. But I think this move specifically, just when you look at the region, I mean, this is a really exciting time, I'm sure, for North Dakota State fans. And, I think, I don't know, I don't want to put words in North Dakota State fans' mouths, but I think they're probably ready for the next challenge. And, I think this is a good landing spot. I think it's kind of a win-win for North Dakota State and then also the Mountain West when you look at the members they lost, the change that they've gone through over the last couple of years. I think that was I wrote a column about it a couple months ago. It was kind of a no-brainer to add them when you look at what they lost and what they were trying to kind of rebuild. And I think that was the easiest solution for both parties for sure.
Is that what the vibe is in Laramie? And I get the sense that it is. I think Tom Berman, the athletic director there, is a fan of NDSU. Obviously, there's connections that we're going to get into a little bit later with Craig Bohl being a major player at both places and the states being somewhat similar. But you get the vibe from Laramie and from the university that they're excited to have NDSU aboard?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a mix of, there's initial excitement with the news of you're adding, an FCS powerhouse into your really from your backyard from kind of like the state pretty close by.
Yeah.
And, I think as more time goes on, you start seeing win total projections kind of come out and you start kind of looking ahead to schedules coming out. And I think some of that excitement has kind of turned into a little bit of anxiety for some Wyoming fans because I think, I don't know if a lot of people know what to expect out of North Dakota State right away, but I think from even talking to Wyoming football coach Jay Salvella, I mean, he knows that that's not going to be an easy task to go up to Fargo year one and play in the Fargo Dome, and I just think it's a mix of excitement, but it's also some anxiety of this isn't a guaranteed win on the schedule. It's not like years prior when you would have a team make that jump from the FCS to FBS. That it's changed a lot in recent years, and you look at some of the other examples across the country, but like Jacksonville State, James Madison, teams like that have made that jump kind of look seamless. And I don't know why North Dakota State would be any different.
Yeah, I think from our standpoint up here, and we don't need to get too far into the weeds here 3 months before the season starts, but I don't know that this is necessarily a powerhouse NDSU team. So for the Wyomings and the other schools that might have a little anxiety about this move, I think this might be a good year for NDSU to make the move from their perspective, from Wyoming's perspective, and from Nevada's perspective, for example. I think it was a different year with if it was the 2013 NDSU team or the 2018 or 19 NDSU team that had my God, a dozen NFL players on it, you'd go, woof, this could be a wagon, as the kids say, right away. I don't know if it's going to be that this year. I think NDSU is going to be just fine, but I don't think that they're going to be some sort of unstoppable juggernaut. Like I think in past years they might have been, even in the old Mountain West. I think they would have been very competitive with a couple of their old teams. I don't know if that's where this Bison team is, which is, I think it's good for the league. I think it's good for NDSU. I was actually talking to somebody the other day, and they said, God, the best thing for NDSU this first year might be if they go 8-4, 7-5, believe it or not, because then people will go, wait a second here. We're not ready for this. We got to write bigger checks. We have to turn out more at the Dome. They need more money. It just, if they somehow, and I don't think it's going to happen, but if they somehow win the league in their first year, it's like people are going to go, well, what the hell are we doing here? Why do we do this for all this money if we're just going to do the same thing we did in FCS? So it's an odd thing up here, the way I and others are looking at it.
Yeah, I think, I wouldn't be surprised if the league kind of set that up the way they did, where I know North Dakota State's got some really tough road games.
Sure.
I think they go to Vegas.
They're at Vegas, at New Mexico, at Air Force, and at Hawaii. So that's like the four toughest road games right out of the chute in their first year.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the storyline going into that October 3rd game is Wyoming has to go play there, and they obviously had never played there, and that's going to be a tough trip to make, especially the way their schedule works out. That's kind of in the bulk of their conference season. So I think they would, Wyoming, if you would obviously ask anybody involved in Wyoming athletics, like they would much rather play that game here.
Sure.
But that's the way the schedule worked out. I mean, that would be a fun matchup in Fargo.
So let's get into that, because you wrote the column that has the headline, "Will Wyoming and North Dakota State be Mountain West rivals?" And I saw your Twitter post about it, and I responded I had some other things I wanted to say that I thought were funny, but I didn't know if people would take them the funny way. So I just did a straight up. I just took a straight up. I think it's going to be a great rivalry, Alex. I really do. I think there's no doubt that Bison fans for the last several years have looked at the Mountain West and said, God, Wyoming would be kind of fun to have as a rival because of some similarities, between the schools and the coaches and the connections. And I think it's just a natural thing that these two schools would have a pretty good rivalry right off the bat.
Yeah, and I'm not from Wyoming. I've lived here for about 5 years now. I'm from Michigan originally, but when I look at, obviously Wyoming's main rival is always going to be Colorado State, but
yes.
Part of that column is that's a non-conference game now. So whether as a unbiased a reporter standpoint, I mean that game doesn't matter as much, and obviously to the fans, you want to win that border war, you want the bronze boot, but at the end of the day, when you look at Mountain West standings, that game does not count in the Mountain West standings anymore. So when you look at, that's part of the headline in that story is, Wyoming needs a new conference rival with Colorado State on the way out. And, I think Utah State's, I had it in the column there, it's kind of like an in-name only rivalry. I mean, they shared a traveling trophy. Bridger's rifle, I mean, that was always fun to see the team celebrate with that thing after the game, but that game didn't mean nearly as much as a border war between Colorado State and Wyoming. So when you look at the similarities between Fargo, North Dakota, Laramie, Wyoming, I mean I think the story kind of writes itself with all the ties between the two schools, the similarities and the communities and just the states in general. I mean that's even the fan bases. I mean I don't think you're going to have a problem from a fan standpoint of getting up for that game. And, I'm curious with a lot of the players now, you look at, and that was the thing, you kind of lose a little bit of that rivalry sense with the transfer portal.
Yeah.
With all these kids,
yep.
All these players switching schools every year, you go into a rivalry game, you don't know how much they actually know of the historical significance of a game like a border war. But when you look at all the change in college football, I mean, you couldn't, in my opinion, you couldn't really draft up a better conference clash that a North Dakota State versus a program like Wyoming. I mean, both historical programs that have had successes in their own right, and when they're gonna meet for the first time, and I think that's gonna be I think this October matchup's going to really open the door for this to be a real thing going forward.
Are Wyoming and Colorado State going to continue to play non-conference for the foreseeable future? I said I don't know what their schedules look like, I guess, for the future.
Yeah. So they signed. They have I think a 10-year deal to do. The border war is going to continue as the first year of that. This is the first year that's going to be a non-conference game, but they signed an agreement through 2036. So that locks up obviously a non-conference game for each school, and they're just going to rotate every year where that game is played. But yeah, like the significance of that, it's going to be weird, man, because the Wyoming opens the season at Colorado State, which normally, I mean, I think the last couple of years that's been one of the last games on the schedule they play, usually late October, early November, and the weather, you never know. And obviously there's some, conference championship implications on the line, but obviously that's not going to be the case. It's going to be season opener for both teams. So that's going to be an interesting, you don't want to get too up for that game, but again, that's not a game you want to lose to open the season either. Right.
The funny thing is, when I saw your tweets, this is how I was going to try to be funny, but I didn't know if people in Wyoming would get my humor. But I'm a columnist, so I have a little liberty to not be straightforward, and I can kind of be a jackass once in a while, frankly. But I was the tweet I had written out was, William Randolph Hearst was once a publisher of a newspaper that famously said, "You give me the pictures. You provide me the pictures, I'll provide you the war." And he was talking about the Spanish-American War with Cuba, or with the Spaniards involving Cuba. I wrote on Twitter, "You provide me the game, I'll provide you the rivalry." And just being I could be a complete dink about things and just get people all riled up. I didn't do that. I think it's going to be a natural fit for these two schools to have some fun together. And I think in part because North Dakota State needs a new rival. Their historic rival for decades was the University of North Dakota. That completely went away for about 15 years. Yeah. And it never really got to be the same after they started playing again. It was getting better, but it wasn't anything like it used to be. And actually, NDSU's rival the last 10 years, it's been pretty good, has been South Dakota State. And the Dakota Market Trophy. But that game is gone now for the foreseeable future as well. And so this one will provide, I think, just a little something to get the fans and people riled up, the media riled up, if you will. And part of that is that a very successful head coach at Wyoming, Craig Bohl, was obviously also a very successful coach at North Dakota State. And there's that natural tie-in, and I think both you and those of us up here that have gotten into it have said, well, the obvious trophy is the Bowl. I mean, just have the Craig Bowl, and I think you even went so far as to ask Grok or Chat GPT or something to come up with a trophy for the Craig Bowl. So it'd be fun. I think it'd be a good thing.
Yeah, and I should copyright that before one of the schools takes it. But and I hope and I think I've heard a lot of Wyoming fans. I think the natural progression and when you lose a school like Colorado State to a different conference, I mean, naturally, a lot of people here have said like, "Oh, Air Force would be a good fit," and I just don't think you can't really just make a rivalry out of like thin air. I think it's got and they've obviously played historically for a really long time, and Air Force has their own rivals. I mean, obviously with the military academies, like that's going to be way more important than coming up to Laramie and playing Wyoming. And like historically, Wyoming's had those rivalries with like schools like BYU and Utah, TCU, but obviously conference realignments kind of put a damper in all that. So I think when you look at just within the conference, I mean, North Dakota State fans aren't going to look at a map and say, yeah, Northern Illinois is a rival or, Nevada's a rival. I think the first thing that comes to mind for either fan base is, the ties between the two programs. I mean, obviously North Dakota State's head coach was at Wyoming, same thing there. And, Craig's son, Aaron, is Wyoming's defensive coordinators. And these guys all coach together at Wyoming.
Yes.
Jay Salvell Wyoming's head coach was the defensive coordinator when Tim Polasek was the offensive coordinator, all in the same room as Craig Bull. And, you look at the history of what Craig Bull did for football at North Dakota State and then Wyoming. I mean, just the programs couldn't be really any more similar when you look at kind of the blueprint that Craig Bull wanted to put on his programs.
Well, what's interesting is that Polasek told us that Northern Illinois actually has been kind of saying that they want to be NDSU's rival, which I understand. I don't know who Northern Illinois' natural rival is in the MAC, if they even had one. But Polasek coached at Northern Illinois as well for a year. But I think, were kind of poking around saying, hey, we should get a trophy going. We should do this. We should do that. And I don't know what his reaction was, but that's just not one that I look at. I've been in Fargo here for 40 years. I've been around forever. Yeah. I just don't see Northern Illinois as becoming some sort of blood rival to North Dakota State. And not because they're not worthy, not because they haven't historically been a pretty decent program in the MAC, but there's just not a lot similarities going on there. Whereas, Bull had it right. When Craig was up here for spring ball, he stopped in to talk to the boosters and the Bison team up here during spring practice. And we asked him about the Wyoming game. And he had it right when he said that Wyoming and North Dakota are similar in terms of the states themselves. Wyoming's more of a westerny state than North Dakota is, but North Dakota views itself far more as a Western state than a Midwestern state. There's the extraction economy, there's agriculture, there's the land grant stuff. Frankly, the politics line up almost perfectly, much to my chagrin, but that we can leave that part out. There's just a lot of similarities between Wyoming and North Dakota, and frankly, people in North Dakota, especially the agriculture ranching community, that's kind of the base of it used to be the North Dakota Ag School. Now it's North Dakota State. They look at Wyoming far more as a close relative than they would the state of Illinois, which would be evil to them in many ways, quite frankly. It's just a natural. Even me, I live in Minnesota. I'm from Minnesota originally. I look at Wyoming and go, yeah, that's the rivalry. I mean, that's the game. That's the one everybody's gonna be looking forward to.
Yeah, I'm a MAC guy. I went to Western Michigan. So,
perfect.
I actually had to Google. So Northern Illinois' rival, I guess, is Ball State. I would have never been able to name that.
Nope, I would not have known that either. I'm glad you told me that. Now I know.
Yeah, I think I think Northern Illinois' whole goal now is, I don't even think they're necessarily looking for rivals. I think they're just glad to be off a Tuesday or Wednesday night action game on ESPN.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. That's a good. I was told that they just never fit into the MAC or wanted to be in the MAC as well. I'm sure they didn't want the Tuesday and Wednesday games, but they just never. They were like the third wheel in the MAC for years, I guess, or something. So they wanted out. But I don't know. Have you talked to the athletic director at Wyoming about this, Tom Berman? Has he weighed in on the possibility of this rivalry or this future with NDSU?
Yeah, he said the same thing Craig did. Basically, similar institutions, similar culture, especially when you look at the sport of football. But he kind of brought up, obviously, Craig Bull, Tim Polasek. Funny story about Tim Polasek, I'll tell you. When he was the offensive coordinator here, it was the second or third game I think I ever covered of Wyoming, and they had won the previous week. It was actually a border war that their backup quarterback went in for their starter got hurt. Had a game-winning drive, won that game in Fort Collins, came back the next week. They were playing basically for a spot in the Mountain West Championship game, or to keep their hopes alive, basically. A really good Boise team. The backup quarterback started that game, and I think he finished like 3 of 15 with 3 picks. like 20 yards or something, and he threw like they had recovered a fumble in the last like 50 seconds. It was George Halani's first career fumble ever, and they returned it to like the 25-yard line, 45 seconds left. Backup quarterback was supposed to throw the ball out of bounds if nothing was open, and throws an interception in the end zone, and the game ends. So I actually asked, I requested Pulisic the next Monday during the media availability. And again, like I'm like 2-3 weeks into this job, and I was like, hey, like pretty simple. I was like, hey, like what's the kind of the message to the quarterback here? Like kind of roller coaster of emotions the last 2 weeks. And, you know, I looked over and Tim Pulisic's crying. And I'm like, whoa, dude, like what's and he just started yelling, like not yelling at me, but like just yelling, like super emotional, like, hey, like that's don't ever question like the heart of my players. And you know, that kind of speaks to the testament. I mean, I've always said like he's a very emotional guy. I mean, he wears that on his sleeve, and you know, that's obviously the passion that he has for what he does. But you know, that was my first interaction with Tim Pulisic, was him yelling at me in the media room, or yelling towards me, yelling in my direction.
It was nothing personal.
He wanted everybody to hear.
Yeah, he's fine. He's fine. But as you know, he's I think as a head coach, and that this might be different from when he was in Laramie. I think as a head coach, he's had to sort of dial some of that back a little bit. That you can't be that emotional publicly about everything as a head coach, and you are kind of the Craig Bowl model is the head coach is the CEO, and if everything is if there's a raging burning fire below you, you can't show anything anything's bothering you or lose your temper or your emotion. So I think that's been a learning experience for Tim as the head coach at NDSU. It's been pretty awesome.
It's been awesome too. Like I you know, Aaron and Craig definitely have their similarities, but just seeing, I think Aaron's going into his third year as the defensive coordinator here. He's done a phenomenal job. They were 30th in the country last year in scoring defense, and you know, they obviously have their similarities, but you can tell they're obviously completely different just in the way they kind of go about their business, and just the way they have relationships with players. And you know, it's cool. I saw. It's funny seeing you mentioned that Craig was up there for spring ball for North Dakota State. He was here too for Wyoming spring ball, and it's funny just seeing him obviously bounce between the two programs. I mean, he's so invested in both, and I'm curious to see. I would wager that he'll be rooting for Wyoming in this first matchup just because of Aaron, but I don't know. That'll probably be a tough watch for him.
It's the old, what's the cliche? Blood is thicker than water. So I would have no doubt that he'll be rooting for Wyoming. He's still viewed as a legend here, obviously, and was inducted into the Athletic Hall of Fame here last season. Had a great reception at the Fargo Dome, and of course, and all that stuff. So it's all good. It's all good for Craig Bowl. So how do people in Laramie view the bowl games and the postseason opportunities in FBS? Because again, Wyoming's been FBS forever, and despite all this silly talk that they were going to drop down to FCS, that was never going to happen. That was all a made up narrative, in my view. Yeah. You would know better than I would, but to me that never made any sense. But
I literally requested a one-on-one interview with Tom Berman, because I mean that conversation's been going on for years, even before Craig Bowl was here. And you know, I literally sat down with Tom Berman. I was like, just explain to me the ramifications of Wyoming dropping from FBS to FCS. And it's plain and simple. It's money, and you look at the amount of money. I know I saw something. You know, the amount of national television or televised games that North Dakota State will play this season alone, just in the Mountain West, compared to, that probably adds up to what they played on national TV over the last 3 years combined. So and with that comes money, and you know, I wrote a whole column about it. You know, the fan perspective is wins and losses matter more than money, but from an athletic department standpoint, I mean, money football drives the bus,
Yes.
and TV contracts drive the bus, and conference affiliations drive the bus, and there's a reason North Dakota State paid what they paid to join the Mountain West.
Yes, that is true. One of the reason I asked the question about the bowls was because that has been one of the hangups. I got on this FBS train 6 years ago, and I've told the story. I've written the story that the head coach at NDSU at the time, Matt Entz, during the pandemic in the fall of 2020, they only could schedule one game against Central Arkansas. They had this absolute juggernaut of a team, which might have been the best NDSU team ever, with Trey Lance at quarterback and Dylan Radens at left tackle and Christian Watson at wide receiver. Would have been one of the better FCS teams of all time. They only played the one game. NDSU was frustrated as hell. They're just thinking, my God, what are we doing here? The Missouri Valley Conference shut down because Western Illinois didn't want to play, and Western Illinois is probably the worst FCS team in the country, one of the 10 worst. And Matt Entz calls me up one night and says, we got to get out of FCS. He goes, we got to get out of FCS. He goes, and this is, I'm a columnist, so I can do this. He said, just throw out there that we should go FBS. Let's just start a conversation. Can you do that? And I said, I'll look into it. I'll think about it. I'm not going to say yes. But after I looked into it and blah, 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 I wrote the column in November of 2020 saying it's time. NDSU's got to get out. And I kept beating the drum for 6 years until it finally happened. But one of the hangups of NDSU fans has been, they can't play for national championships. They're not going to have playoffs anymore. And I kept saying they've won 10 of them. Like it doesn't matter anymore. You've seen it all. You've seen the same movie 10 times. How I can watch The Godfather 50 times, and the first 5 times was great. The last 45 was like, okay, I know what the ending is now. And so that's why I ask about the bowls and about the postseason. How does Laramie view that? Is it a big deal to go to a bowl? Do they enjoy it? Do they travel? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the significance of a bowl game, you've seen this all over the country. It's obviously dwindled over since obviously the college football playoff expansion and all. So to say people in Laramie are excited, even when Craig Bowl was here, that was the biggest complaint about Craig Bowl is, we're good to win 7-8 games, go play in Arizona Bowls, Potato Bowls, New Mexico Bowls, Hawaii Bowls, blah, blah. And that's the, if you don't, and now you saw a couple of years ago, Boise State wins the Mountain West, ends up in the college football playoff. And that's the
James Madison last year. Yep.
And that's the highs and lows of being a group of 5, group of 6 team right now. And, until that changes, I don't see, I think realistically, I would say a Mountain West championship would mean more to anybody that's currently in the Mountain West outside of maybe UNLV and maybe New Mexico this year, just expectation wise. I mean, obviously the goal is to get to the college football playoff, and that the avenue to get there is to win the Mountain West. And if you get that done, you kind of see where the cards fall. But to answer the question, I mean, no, I don't. I think the bowl games specifically, I've kind of lost the appeal for like a fan's perspective. But I mean, it's still, and I go back to the column I wrote about why Wyoming wouldn't drop down to FCS. And, Tom Berman even came out. He was like, obviously Montana State just won the FCS national championship. And he's like, they still don't do as well as we do financially. I mean, you win a national championship and you're making less money than Wyoming did winning 4 games.
The playoffs cost you money in FCS. That's people do not know that. NDSU lost money on the playoffs every year in the FCS. Lost money.
And that's insane. And again, I go back to, it's like fans want wins. And would you rather go 12-0, 14-0 at North Dakota State in the FCS every single year? Or would you rather join the big boy table and, try and win the Mountain West and do what James Madison did, and get into the college football playoff? The exposure that you get from that, it's just like March Madness. where you look at, Florida Gulf Coast a decade ago, or whatever. Like your enrollment skyrockets, your exposure skyrockets. And that's not even to mention, the money that you get from playing in those games versus, playing in a FCS semifinal game and against, a team that nobody really watches during the regular season.
For sure.
And I'm not. It's like no disrespect to the FCS. I just think it was, for North Dakota State's sake, I think it was time to make the jump. And I think financially, I mean, you look at what Sacramento State, North Dakota State just paid to move up. That is the indicator of how much they're willing to invest in order to get the exposure that the FBS programs get in today's day and age.
And I am one of the few people in college football media around the country who wrote a column praising Sacramento State for what they did, because for them, they figured it's the right move. I mean, the president is maybe a little wacky. I don't know if I don't know if Sacramento State went about it the right way, but you're talking the 20th largest TV market in the country, in I think still the most populous state in the country. And so they did what they felt they had to do to get out of the Big Sky and get out of the FCS. So I said, good luck, good for them. I mean, they're going to the MAC, which whatever, but.
Yeah, but people forget too. Like they had the money. They had publicly said for 2 years, like, we are willing to pay this much money to move up, and that goes into, I don't want to speculate, but I would imagine that the Mountain West had some conversations with Sacramento State, and that they ended up in the MAC. And there was a money amount, there was a dollar amount that the MAC needed to take that risk and take them into that conference. And, they're willing to pay, I forgot how much, what $20 million, whatever. I think
it was 18 million, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're willing to pay that to go play Wednesday night MACtion games in DeKalb, Illinois, right? Whatever it is.
Yep. Okay. Hey man, it's been, I told you 30 minutes and we're a little bit over. So I will cut this off. We certainly will have more time down the road at Mountain West Media Days or wherever we meet up again. We can chat again. But I greatly appreciate you coming on. Like I said, you provide the game, I'll provide the rivalry, and I'll look up some things about Wyoming that the folks are sensitive about out there, and I'll write it up, and we'll get this rivalry. We'll get it cooking at some point. Okay?
Yeah, that sounds good, man. Anytime, I'll be around. You got my number.
All right, that's Alex Taylor of wyosports.com. You can check his work. He covers the Wyoming Cowboys football team for that newspaper/website. This is the McFeely Mess Podcast, inform.com. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the McFeely Mess Podcast at inform.com. For more podcasts and columns, head to inform.com and search Mike McFeely.